Hi, everyone. Welcome to another KE Report webinar. I'm your host, Corey Fleck, and today in this webinar, we are featuring Capella Minerals, traded on the TSX Venture Exchange under the symbol CMIL. I'm chatting with the President and CEO, Erik Roth. Now, just to bring everybody up to speed, I wanted to feature Capella Minerals on this webinar because the company has recently gone through a pretty important refocus on where their main projects will be and where the company will be exploring. We're going to spend a lot of time focusing on some of the new projects in the company in Sweden and in Norway, as well as review some of the Canadian projects that will also have work done. This whole refocus of the company, I think, is important to outline and bring everybody up to speed on because, well, the company does have, I think it's 5 active projects that will be getting some exploration work done here in the fairly near term. Erik and I are recording this, so a recording will be available to everyone that is attending. Everyone that is attending, if you want to ask questions, please just use the question tab within this program. I will get those questions answered by Erik throughout this presentation. And if anybody has any questions on the back end of this recording, please, you can always email me, fleck@kereport.com. Erik, start us off with the presentation. I'll come in and out with some questions.
Okay, thanks, Corey. Thanks for the introduction there, and welcome to all the listeners. Look, I guess as you mentioned in the introduction there, I think this is a big step change for the company in the sense of we do now have 5 active projects, as you mentioned in your introduction. We've now focused on the Northern Hemisphere. People who have followed the company will also know that we have basically divested our Argentine assets for the simple reason that, and that's more because of jurisdictional risk. It's not anything to do with the technical aspects of the projects, but you know, what people will see going forward is we have a very nice portfolio. We have 3 high-grade gold projects, 2 of which are in Canada, 1 is in Sweden, and we also have 2 high-grade copper projects which are sitting in old mining districts in Norway. And personally, I think that really rounds out the portfolio very nicely in terms of having both that exposure to the high-grade gold assets, and we know gold markets are buoyant at the moment. There's obviously a lot of interest in gold projects, but I do feel there's a lot of potential for high-grade copper deposits going forward. And in fact, Corey, if you look at the last, let's say 6 months, you know, we have seen quite a significant move in copper prices as well, or base metal prices in general. So I do think it makes a nice rounded portfolio for the project, for the company going forward. As I mentioned, they're all in the Northern Hemisphere, and in fact, that's actually where the name Capella Minerals comes from. Capella, of course, is one of the brightest stars in the Northern Hemisphere, the night sky. So that's basically where the name came from, and it really just reflects this new emphasis on the Northern Hemisphere. And as I say, that it's a very good mix of gold and copper projects. And what we see here on the introductory slide, these are actually pictures from the Lochen district in Norway, and this was actually an old mining district. And keep in mind, I'll talk a little bit more about Norway in a moment, but you know, people have this erroneous thought in their mind that it's just an oil-producing country, right? And I'll explain a little bit further into the presentation that, you know, these are copper mines that have been active, were active for 300 years. They closed down in the mid-80s because of metal prices, and they've basically been inactive since then. So, and I'll talk a little bit about more of that in a moment. But what you're looking at on the introductory screen are some photos from the Lochen mining district. The forward-looking statements people are familiar with, so we'll just skip through those. Just in terms of a map and just to locate, so people can locate themselves in terms of where our 5 active projects are. So if I start on the left-hand side of the screen, so that's looking at Canada. Furthest west in Manitoba, we have the Domain joint venture, which of course is a joint venture with Yamana Gold. Now, Yamana are the project operators there, and we are working with them now to basically get a work plan figured out for Q1, which I will expect to include some drilling as well too. So we are working with Yamana right now on that. The second project, of course, in Canada is Savant Lake, and for people who followed the company previously, they'll realize that we completed our earn-in to 100% on this project back in April, and in September we announced an earn-in joint venture for Ethos Gold. Now, for people who aren't familiar with Ethos Gold, they're actually part of the Discovery group of companies, and you know, it's a group that's had a lot of success over the years. Just now, in fact, one of their companies is called Newfound Gold, which has had some very good gold hits in Newfoundland. They've also been indirectly involved in Great Bear Resources. So this is a group that's got very good technical skills, and they've had very good success in the markets as well too. So they're perfect joint venture partners for us, and they were really looking for I should say a very large scale, district scale play in Ontario, and Ontario and Savon Lake basically fits that criteria. If I move across to Scandinavia, as I've mentioned, so we've just recently acquired from EMX Royalty two VMS or massive sulfide type deposits, which are in central Norway. So one is called Lochen, the other one is called Sholey, and that's the one that's spelled KJOLI. So they're the two copper projects, and the Southern Gold Line in Sweden there. So I think the key message to get home is that it's three high-grade gold projects, two high-grade copper projects in former producing areas. So these are old mining districts, and of course in favorable jurisdictions. I don't think anybody would have an issue with Canada, Norway, Sweden in terms of as jurisdictions in which to operate. I do mention on the slide too, we still have a residual interest in the Sierra Blanca divestiture from Santa Cruz, but I'm sure that eventually, as time goes on, that interest will diminish.
Now, that's one thing to note too, Eric, is that this company used to be focused in Argentina. For a number of different reasons, you guys have divested pretty much all those projects and now have this new focus. That all happened this year.
That's correct. It all happened this year. And, if I take a step back and look at Argentina, so the main issues for us really were, now Santa Cruz, the province that we were operating in, Corey, has been very supportive to us. We've had a lot of support at the provincial level. Of course, the main issues in Argentina are more at the federal level, the state of the economy, all of these sort of factors that do not make it sort of a favorable place to invest money right now. And of course, the other issue with Argentina is, do you wait 5 years for it to turn around, or do you not wait? And I guess at the end of the day, look, our shareholders don't have that sort of stamina. So that was really the reason for taking the decision. As I say, when we got involved in Argentina, it was the right thing to do at the right time. There was a different government in place. It was a very pro-business environment in place. It was the place to be back in early 2018. And then, of course, in the interim, we've had a change of government. Things have changed. And of course, we have to adapt to the new circumstances. So that's all happened this year. So we've seen a major change in the company during 2020. So just just to also back up on the projects here too, I guess so one thing, we have a very good portfolio of projects, but I think the other thing too to highlight, Corey, as well too, is the management and the people involved in this company. We've been there, we've done this before, we've made discoveries. Most of the team is from Mariana Resources, and people who followed Mariana would probably remember the Hod Maden discovery we had in Turkey. The company was eventually bought out by Sandstorm in 2017. Before then, I was CEO of a company called Extori Gold Mines, which was sold to Yamana in 2012. So we've had this track record of success where we really know what we're looking for. And for a small company, we know what we should be looking for, which is really these high-grade deposits, these high-value type deposits, which don't need big capexes to develop. And for us, that's really the sweet spot, is to come in, make the discoveries, push them through the scoping and pre-feasibility type levels, and then look for partners on the project. So that sort of is our MO, if you like, and we've been very successful at it over the years. So as I say, most of the team here involved is from the Mariana days. And so if you have a winning formula, just keep it together, and that's sort of where we are today. Capital structure of the company. So I guess probably the only thing I'll really highlight right now. So right now the company's trading at about 8 cents, 8 or 9 cents plus or minus. That gives us a market capitalization of about 11 million Canadian, which is pretty low considering the type of projects we have, and we'll obviously talk about the projects at the moment in a moment. We do have about 2 to 2.5 million Canadian in cash still in the bank. Major shareholders, Sandstorm Gold remains one of the big shareholders with 14%. Management and insiders, of course, still have about 10%. I still hold about 5 or 6% of the company. And also, too, the company, as well as that, is also, also has a shareholding, or I should say, has shares in other companies that we've received as part of some of the deals. And we have some Ethos Gold shares, which came out of the Savon Lake deal. And I do expect that by the end of November, we should have some shares from Cerrado Gold as well too. So we do have a little sort of investment portfolio in the background as well too, which will give us upside to those shares in those companies.
Erik, is there any restrictions on these shareholdings that you guys hold in other companies?
Yeah, so what will happen is in the case of Cerrado, so they are doing a listing, and I would expect that will come with probably a 4-month hold, just the standard as for other investors. Now, in the case of Ethos, a similar situation. Now, look, obviously for us, it's not the time to sell. You know, in the case of both of them, I think they have significant upside. So obviously, we would like to take that through to a point where it actually would make sense to move those shares. But for the moment, we're happy to hold those. And let's face it, if either of those two companies have big success, that also benefits the Capella shareholders as well too. So it's not just the work we're doing, but there's also some other things in the background that could also generate some good wealth for the company.
Okay.
So I guess maybe what I'll do, Corey, with the presentation, I'll start with the Scandinavian assets because they're the newest and probably least understood from the market perspective, and then I'll move back to the Canadian projects. But I sort of titled it, especially in the case of the Norwegian ones, exploring for new high-grade mines in the shadow of headframes. And for, you know, for us I guess in exploration, that's sort of one of the old I guess sayings that's quite famous. You know, the best place to find a new mine is where you already have a mine, right? So you know, the fact that we've actually been able to get these properties, I mean, these are mining districts that were in production for hundreds of years. As I mentioned at the beginning, they closed in the mid-80s simply because of low metal prices, and they haven't been touched since. Because what happened in Norway, of course, in the mid-80s was that oil took off, everybody forgot about all the mining, and just everybody went oil crazy. But of course, what's happened in the interim now is that Norway also realizes that it does need to reduce its dependence on oil, and so there's a lot of support for developing these other industries, and particularly in the case of copper, which plays such an important industry, you know, an important part in the clean energy industries, energy transmission, electric vehicles, all of that, and so you know, so there's a lot of support from the government to develop these things that are not oil. And later on, I'll explain geologically why these things do exist. But you know, I think it's important that people realize when we talk about oil, Norway, that's the North Sea. We're not talking about the mainland in Norway. And then, of course, the gold project in Sweden, which I'll talk to in a moment as well too. And it probably just worth mentioning as well too, the Lochen deposit was actually the biggest of its type anywhere in the world for a massive sulfide. It's what we call a Cyprus type deposit. They produced over 24 million tons at 2.3% copper and 1.8% zinc, and there's gold and silver credits in this as well too. So these were big deposits for their class. So you know, one should never sort of, you know, we're not talking about little tiny wheelbarrow sort of operations. I mean, these were very significant deposits in their day, and we feel there's lots of potential to still add to you know, what we know in terms of what's left in the district. Also, perhaps just to flag quickly too, that these are very large land packages we have in all of these areas. You know, Sholey is the smallest at 120 square kilometers. Lochen is 210 square kilometers, and the Southern Gold Line in Sweden is 500 square kilometers. So we have very large land holdings in very, very prospective belts here.
So Erik, what's the permitting environment like in these countries? If they're trying to make a move more towards mining, is it easier to get permits? Is there a pretty defined process to go through?
Yeah, so thankfully the permitting, and if we specifically talk about drilling at this point in time, because that's the one that affects us shortest term. So there is a very clear process. You know, one of the good things about both Norway and Sweden is that the rules of the game are crystal clear. When you apply for drill permits, it's effectively about a 2-month process where the government contacts any landowners, obviously, you know, sort of talks to all the relevant people, and we also as well talk to the people. But it's about a 2-month window to get that done, and people are certainly getting permits through. So as I say, the government is very supportive. In this particular case, we also have the advantage that because these are old mining districts, you know, people understand mining. I mean, most of the people in the town, you know, their grandfathers worked in these operations, right? So, you know, so these are districts where people understand mining. They're very happy to have it, and to be honest, they've all said to us they would love to see it reactivated again. So, so the whole process is about 2 months to get the drill permits, and then of course, you know, down the track, as I say, there's a lot of interest from the government to get these up and running. And in the case of the Norwegian assets specifically, there's a lot of existing or old infrastructure there that they would be hoping that we use. And, and the infrastructure, I should also add, is fantastic here. I mean, it's, electric railways right to the door of the, the old mine sort of thing. So, and you've got ports 25 kilometers away. So the infrastructure is just first class here. I mean, that's one of the other advantages too, that we can really hit the ground running here. So on this slide, Corey, so I won't go into any of the sort of gory details here, other than to point out sort of the comment that I made earlier, where the belt geologically that these Norwegian copper deposits sit in is actually an extension of a lot of these prolific these mining camps in northeastern Canada, such as Bathurst and Buchan's. So these were all connected at one point. So that's why people are kind of surprised when they look at this slide. Again, people think, oh, but Norway's just oil. But then when you look at the geology, you understand actually these were very productive districts in a very productive belt. So, so as I mentioned, this belt goes all the way from Norway, goes through England, and then would have gone through northeastern Canada at that time. So this has been a very prolific belt for these massive sulfide, these base metal rich deposits. So I'll just start with Lochen here, and look, obviously there's a lot more information on the website, but really just to give people a sort of a flavour of what we're looking at here. As I mentioned, this is a very large land holding here. There's about 210 square kilometres around what we call the old Lochen mine, and the old Lochen mine is there in the centre. And essentially what you see is you see a number of deposits on surface that with variable levels of development, and in fact, and basically most of them have seen no development. And the photograph on the right-hand side in that slide is one of our priority targets, which is called Dragset, and you'll see that on the map in the western part of the property. There's lots of these things where people were scratching around on surface. That there's big targets here in terms of both the geophysics and also what we see on surface. There's massive sulfide here, and really never been drilled, right? So I mean, it's quite extraordinary to see this, that you have all these targets, and the modern exploration on it has been just about zero, right? I mean, as I mentioned, that these mines closed in the mid 80s because of low metal prices. And the other thing to keep in mind when I say low metal prices, the mid 80s copper was at 70 cents a pound, and now it's at $3.20 or something like that, right? So obviously, when they shut down, they were operating at very low metal price environments. So, but I think the key message here really is that there's a lot of targets developed. We have 5 today, which we would consider a priority. Something like Dragset, which is the photo on the right, I would consider a walk-up drill target. That basically is kind of a no-brainer. You go in there and drill that, right? But some of the other ones, I just want to make sure we've got the best targets identified before we go into that permitting process. And then basically on the back of that, after that 2-month permitting process, then we're ready to drill here. So Lochen, I think, is great in terms of there's obviously the old mining infrastructure. There's a lot of upside along strike. And the other thing too with these massive sulfide deposits too, which is very characteristic, is they always occur in clusters, right? So that's just the nature of the beast. That's the way these systems are. So I see great upside potential here around the old Lochen mine in some of these other targets, as well as looking for extensions to what they were mining at Lochen itself.
So Eric, what's some of the initial work that you guys are going to undertake when it comes to further defining these targets to get into the permitting?
Yeah, that's correct. So I should have sort of mentioned right at the beginning when we talked about the 5 active projects. So since we signed the deal in August, we basically had people on the ground on all 3 Scandinavian projects. So the other thing to keep in mind too, Corey, is that obviously the winter is the same time as Canada. So we've tried to do as much as we possibly can in the field before the snows come. Now Lochen is okay because it's lower altitude. Sholey is a little bit higher. But for the moment, we're okay at Lochen. But really what we've been doing is two things. These massive sulfides respond very well to geophysics, and particularly electromagnetic geophysics. So these EM surveys that we call them, are very helpful for defining where they are. But we've also been doing some ground magnetics and some other things as well, as well as documenting and mapping what we see on surface. So this is really a combination of what we see geologically and overlaying the geophysics on it to prioritize targets for drilling.
Okay, thank you.
So, so as I say, so in the Lochen, there's a couple of walk-up drill targets, but there's also a number of other targets which, you know, I'd like to make sure we've had a good look at first before we actually go in there and do the drilling. But having said that, obviously we do want to get drill rigs turning here ASAP, because that's what's going to excite the market when we've got drilling happening on these projects, right? But I do want to make sure we've got the best targets identified before we make that, before we go into the permitting process. And keep in mind, we've only had the projects for a couple of months, right? So, so we have actually pushed them forward quite quickly, but there's obviously more to still be done here. So the second project in Norway is this project called Sholey. And the other thing I should mention, these were quite large mines too. Just to give people in the case of Lochen, which is what we looked at previously, you know, this was a mine that was the underground mine. It was basically 4 kilometers long and got to about 1 kilometer at its deepest part. So these are quite significant, you know, these were big deposits in their day. And a similar thing happens here at Sholey, where in the southern part of the property is the Skillingdal mine. That's the one that's spelled K-I-L-L. Basically at that mine, that was one of the deepest mines in Europe, where it got to about 1.4 kilometers depth. So these are quite significant mining operations. You know, as I say, these aren't guys just with wheelbarrows, and I mean, these were very significant mining operations in their day. We at Sholey, we basically have about 15 kilometers of strike from Skillingdal to the north, which goes through the old Sholey mine as well. There's two main targets here that we're looking for. One is the massive sulfides in the prospective stratigraphy, which is really what the main target is. And without getting into too much geological detail, there's also younger rocks, these sedimentary rocks that have been thrown over the top. And on that map that you see on the left, that's what's colored in yellow. So that's actually a thrust fault, which has put younger barren rocks on top of the mineralized stratigraphy. So there's two things. One is we're looking for things that are obvious, and that's some of the photos you see on the right-hand side there. But also there's potential for deposits under that thin, that veneer, if you like, of these barren rocks sitting on top. So I think this is a really great project, and I do think, and again, it's one of these projects that you go, with the amount of mineralization you see on surface, it's crazy there hasn't been more drilling or more work done on the project. I mean, there's evidence everywhere for massive sulfides, and you know, it's just again, I think it's a project with a lot of good upside. And just to make one quick comment there, so again, it's a similar, I guess, operational style here, Corey. So basically what we're doing is it's a combination of geophysics that we're using, as well as the mapping and knowing where the occurrences are to really help us with the, I guess, the target prioritization for drilling. On that map, there's a sort of an orangey brown rectangle, and that basically is what that. I mean, it's only about 4.5 kilometers of the 15 kilometers of strike that we've been able to cover so far, up until the end of till October. So you know, there's still a lot more work to be done here. Having said that, even within that rectangle, that 4.5 kilometer strike length that we've already looked at, there's targets you could say, well, that's a no-brainer to drill as well. And I'll show you on a slide in a moment where we're at with that. So again, you know, this is something we can come in and drill very quickly, but keeping in mind that there's still a lot of potential to still be looked at along the trend here of interest.
Erik, can you give us an update as to what sort of historic data you have, whether it's the mining that has happened there or any of the past drilling that's happened? How much of that are you working off of?
Yeah, so that's a good question, Corey, and so we've tried to pull in as much of the old mining data as possible, but of course, because a lot of these mines were sort of, you know, I guess that's been a bit harder sort of pulling all that together because they closed in the 80s. But these are actually mines that have been in production since, like, you know, 1650. I mean, you know, they literally go back hundreds of years, these mines. But one of the good things that the government in Norway does is they do spend a lot. Their geological survey also helps a lot. They've done, in the case of Sholey, they've done an airborne magnetic survey. They've done airborne electromagnetics. And these are all the good things that help us to prioritize targets. So the government has actually spent money on doing a lot of that stuff already, right? And in fact, the reason they did that was precisely to promote exploration on these properties. So we are very fortunate in that, as well as our own data that we're collecting, we do have a lot of existing data, both from the Norwegian Geological Survey, plus whatever we've been able to pull together from previous operations and things like that. But the Geological Survey in Norway has spent a lot of money, a lot of time pulling this together because they also want to help move these projects forward. So we've been very, very fortunate in that aspect. So, but anyway, this was just this slide here without getting into too much detail. But again, this is just the area that was that brown rectangle on the previous slide, just really to flag that we've only really looked at 4.5 kilometers of this 15 kilometers of strike, and we haven't really looked out under that younger sort of cover to the west. So there's still a lot more to be done here. Having said that, you can see on this map all the red dots are occurrences of massive sulfide on surface with copper, with mineralization that are mineralized. So we can quite clearly see trends, and there's already targets in there that we could literally, once we go into permitting, we could get those drilled very quickly. But keeping in mind there's still a lot more to still look at. We've covered a lot of ground, but we've only had the projects for a couple of months, but we are pushing them forward as quickly as we can. So that sort of is the massive, that's the massive sulfides in Norway, and as I mentioned at the beginning, I do think that's a good thing for us, having some copper exposure. Having said that, now I'll flip back to sort of the gold side of the portfolio, because obviously there's a lot of buoyancy still in gold projects. Scandinavia, for some of your listeners may be familiar, that there's a lot of activity these days in Scandinavia, not just Sweden, also Finland next door. There's obviously a lot going on in Scandinavia right now with respect to gold. So we've picked up this Southern Gold Line project, which is actually in a belt of deposits where, and Agnico Eagle is obviously the biggest player in this belt. They have a deposit to the north of us called Barsele, which is a joint venture with Barsele Minerals. But right next to our concessions, there are two other mines / development projects, which is Svartliden and Fäbodliden. And these are basically, so this is a belt with known deposits in it. We see evidence for mineralization in the properties. The specific geology type here, we're looking for high-grade vein type systems fundamentally, in a specific geological setting, and all of this ground has been staked over repetitions of what we think look like geological analogs to the known mines. So the whole concept here is that the ground has been staked over analogs to what we know exists elsewhere in the belt. The other thing too is that one of the techniques they often use in Sweden, Corey, is mineralized boulders, and what typically happens, because you've got, it's like Canada in the sense you have generally about 10 meters of till covering a lot of the outcrop, but you have these boulders that roll essentially downhill, to put it simply, right? So we do see in the southern claims here mineralized boulders that have rolled down from uphill, and obviously the challenge then is to trace them back to the source. So this is a really good project in the sense of the geology is fantastic. We know it's a well mineralized belt, and we've got some very prospective terrain, and we do see these gold mineralized boulders on surface. So this is a good package. I don't think this project is quite ready to drill just yet. I would personally like to see another summer, next summer, work done on this, because we do have targets today, but it's still 500 square kilometers. It's a big property, and again, I just want to make sure that when we do drill this one, we've looked at all the targets properly. So I do think this is a great project, but I would prefer not to drill this one immediately, because I think we still have a lot more work to do. Certainly the next summer, I think that we can cover a lot of this ground.
Okay. Is the field season limited on this project up in Sweden?
Yeah, so what happens in both Sweden and Norway, Corey, is that basically, the field season sort of goes till the end of November, or really until whenever the snow comes, I guess. I mean, when the snows come, you can still do things, and in fact, most people drill during the winters. So that's actually the best time to drill, especially in Norway, because they have this sort of like this boggy sort of soil, if you like, and during the winter that freezes up, and it makes it much easier to get in there and drill. So generally the winters are fantastic for drilling. You can do some other work as well too, but generally what people do is they try and take advantage of the summer, which I'll just sort of loosely say is sort of March to end of October, November type thing, and they try and do as much drilling as they can during the winter. So the winter does have its purposes, but it's not the best for if you want to go out and look at outcrops and things like that. Obviously, if you've got half a meter of snow on it, you kind of got limitations in terms of what you can do. So that sort of rounds out, just gives you a high-level overview of the Scandinavian projects. And as I say, I think they're really exciting. It's an exciting package. Of the three, I think the two Norwegian copper projects are the closest to drilling, and we'll certainly push those forward towards drilling. The Scandinavian, the Swedish gold project, I would like personally, I mean, we could go in there and drill targets, but personally, I would like to give that another summer season before we went into that drilling phase, just to make sure we've really looked at it properly here. So that then takes us back to the Canadian projects, and these are projects, people who followed us, New Dimension, over the years would probably be fairly familiar with these. So what I could do is just give you an update in terms of the latest where these are sitting. Now, of course, obviously, you know, Canada's a great jurisdiction to be in. There's lots of upside. We've seen lots of discoveries being made of late. So I do think this is you know, these are both are fantastic projects in their own rights. Domain, which is the project in Manitoba, as I mentioned at the beginning, that's a joint venture with Yamana Gold. Yamana Gold are the project operators here. Now, this is the most advanced project we have in terms of drilling done. So this has almost 10,000 meters of drilling on it. And interestingly, that drilling has only been done over a very small strike extent. So we're talking about 800 meters of what is probably you know, 6 kilometers total of prospective stratigraphy to drill. So the drilling so far, that 10,000 meters has really just been focused in a small part of that. And I do think that this is actually the project that could get to a resource status the quickest, just simply because we have the most drill information. And from here, really, it's testing a long strike and also at depth too, and on where we know the mineralization is. So I do think that this is the project of ours that is closest to a resource status. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, so we're talking to Yamana now about fine-tuning that the work program. There is a First Nations agreement in place. So basically, the Yamana right now is in the permitting stage for essentially drilling. And the idea would be that basically we would plan on drilling this in Q1, all things being equal and everything going well with the permitting, which we don't expect any issues. But hopefully, you know, we will be drilling here Q1. So that basically is the plan for Domain.
Yamana is the operator, correct?
That's correct, yeah. So Yamana is the operator, and obviously we still have to figure out, you know, sort of fine-tune details with them in terms of what we will actually do and what we'll test. You know, we have some ideas in terms of things that we would like to test, and they'll obviously have their own ideas. But really, as I say, I do think this is a great project. Yamana is obviously very keen on this district too. I mean, our joint venture area, if you look at the map, we only have a relatively small package of claims in the middle, and we're surrounded basically by this sea of Yamana projects, and also down the road they have a project called Monument Bay. So I know this is a district that Yamana is very keen on. So let's, you know, we are pushing to get some more drilling happening here. And as I say, I think likely we are pushing for Q1 next year, but obviously Yamana are the joint venture partners, they're the operators, so it really depends on them also to push the process forward. And then the other project, of course, is Savant Lake, which is in Ontario, and you know, we've seen a lot of activity in Ontario over the years. I still think any of these Archean greenstone belts are, you know, a fantastic hunting ground for deposits. In the case of Savant Lake, the target we were always looking for here was one of these high-grade iron formation hosted gold deposits, which is very similar to what Newmont has at the Musselwhite mine. So, you know, the nice thing about these deposits is they're generally high grade and they're very clean metallurgy normally. So, you know, so we view that as a really attractive target here. As I mentioned, we have a very large land holding here. It's about almost 230 square kilometers. And I should also add too that this is the first time that anybody has actually pulled that property package together. So New Dimension / Capella was the first company to pull that together as one concession. And now we've really got an opportunity to pull it apart and take a look for more of this gold mineralization. As I say, so the target here is this iron formation hosted gold deposits, akin to what Newmont sees at Musselwhite. We did do the deal with Ethos, and I did explain a little bit about Ethos at the beginning, but they're fantastic partners to have on board. I know they'll push this forward. You know, they have our ideas in terms of what should be drilled. They will obviously be bringing their own ideas in terms of what should be drilled. And I think out of that, we should see a really productive joint venture going forward. So I'm really enthusiastic about that. I think we've got the right partners there. And the other thing too is because we're not looking after the day-to-day management on the Canadian projects, we're obviously still involved and we help with the decision-making process. That also gives us focus, the chance to focus on our 100% projects, specifically the Scandinavian projects. So I think there's some great upside here. And, so Domain, if I just give one slide very quickly on each, just again, it's the joint venture. It's the most advanced in terms of the drilling. You can see that tenement map or the claim map in the bottom right-hand corner, where our joint venture area is just a small block within a larger sea of Yamana claims, and we do know that they are very keen on pushing this area forward. So I think this is a great, and as I say, this is the project. I believe very strongly in it, and I do think it is the one that's the closest to getting to resource status in the short term. And just a high-level overview on Savant Lake there again. Just as I mentioned, large package. We do have the deal with Ethos. The work that we have done ourselves. We've already identified a number of greater than ounce per ton gold showings on it. So, and none of them have been drilled. Even the New Dimension back in the winter of 2017 did 8 drill holes on this, and for some, look, I wasn't in the company at the time, but the focus was really on geophysical targets in the northern part of the property. But a lot of these high-grade showings in the central and southern part of the prospect were never ever drilled, right? So that is where I see the upside for both Ethos and ourselves here. And the other thing to also mention, because these iron formations are the key host that we're looking for, the airborne magnetics data suggests we've got about 60 kilometers of strike to test. So this is a big project to test as well. And again, I like the deposit style. I like it's a great area to be in. We've got a lot of smoke here. Let's see if we can zero in on the fire here. So.
Now, again, if anybody has any follow-up questions after you read into this presentation or at the end of this presentation, please email me, fleck@kereport.com. I will get Erik to address those. I just wanted to throw that in there, Erik.
No, that's perfect. Thanks, Corey. And really, just to round it out, obviously, just in terms of news flow, which is really what the investors want to understand, and particularly with regard to the timing on drilling. Look, we get it. I mean, what moves the market is drilling, and that's got to be our priority. And it's also for us the most exciting part of the job, right? I mean, when you're drilling and making discoveries, right? So in terms of the Scandinavian portfolio, so we are in this process of completing the drill target generation work. As I mentioned through the presentation, I think the 2 Norwegian copper projects are closest to going into permitting to be drilled. Just simply because in both cases there are walk-up drill targets, and there's also other targets that we will develop as time goes on. But I think the 2 Norwegian copper projects are closest. Southern Gold Line, as I say, I mean, we could drill if we had to, but I would honestly prefer to give that another season just to make sure we've really looked at that properly. And then, of course, the Canadian, both the Canadian gold projects. I think Domain is the one that's closest to drilling. I am hoping that with Yamana we can get a drill plan on the table soon. That's the plan there. And of course, with Savant Lake 2, again, Ethos will sort of guide that process. But I do think that they're obviously their goal too is to get out there and drill quickly too. So they're very like-minded in that sense. So there's a lot of activity going on right now, and I think the projects that are closest to drilling, Corey, would be the two Norwegian copper projects and Domain in Manitoba. So they would be the closest to drilling, and the others will follow shortly after. And as I mentioned, we do still have an interest, sort of a residual interest in the Sierra Blanca. That's the Santa Cruz property that we had. We did the deal with Austral Gold there. And but again, with time, that will become of less interest to us. And just to round out there, of course, again, that comment that the leadership team. I mean, look, we have a track record. We know what needs to be done. We know what has to be done. We've done it before, and we want to do it again. So I think that's one of the key things. You've got a really good team that's been there, done that. We know what needs to be done. Let's move these things forward and make the discoveries, right? I mean, that's obviously the key thing for us. And for all the shareholders too. So obviously for us, the key is to get these into drilling as quickly as possible, and obviously discovery. So that's kind of that just sort of rounds out the high level overview there, Corey. I mean, obviously, if there are questions or if people want to contact us, they're more than welcome to do so. As I say, I think this is it's a great portfolio. We do have the 5 active projects. In fact, it's been a long time since we've been this active in terms of things moving. I mean, this year, because of the Argentina sort of decline, if you like, I mean, obviously there wasn't much movement on the Argentine project, so we didn't have a lot of news flow in 2020. And of course, that obviously, I mean, the market sort of interpreted that as we weren't doing much, but the reality is Argentina was, we were having other issues in Argentina. But going forward, there'll be lots of news flow. We'll be pushing these things forward, and there'll be some great news flow as we go forward here. And I look forward to keeping people updated. And of course, we want to see some drilling short term. That's what it's all about. So that's kind of where we are.
Very true, Erik. Drilling is what is going to drive the stock, the company
That's right.
forward. But you have a couple really new projects into the company with some historic work done on it. I realize the next little while is still target generation, but as you move through that, I will keep bringing you on the show. And again, if anybody has any follow-up questions, please email me, fleck@kereport.com. And as for right now, Erik, please just keep us as up to date as possible. I hope everybody found this webinar interesting and informative. Please share it where you wish, and please keep in touch as this story now moves forward with this new focus. Erik, thank you for your time, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll follow up as more news hits the market. Thanks, Erik.
Thanks, Corey. Appreciate it.